Hi, this is Daryl Myatt from Keller, Texas. Today is Monday, May 9th, 2011. Hope you guys had a great Mother's Day. I enjoyed mine. Happy to tell my mother Happy Mother's Day, and also my wife. Anyway, let's have a look at what's going on today. Today is Memorial Day in Israel. So let's talk about that. This first story out of Arutz Sheva says Israel remembers its heroes. The main ceremony for Memorial Day for the soldiers who fell in Israel's wars and the victims of terror attacks began at the Kotel Plaza at 8 p.m. A 60-second long siren sounded nationwide, and millions of Israeli citizens stood in honor of the 22,867 people who gave their lives fighting for the homeland and who were murdered in the terror attacks. The President, Prime Minister, and the IDF Chief of Staff are attending the Kotel ceremony along with bereaved families. At 4:30 p.m., bereaved families attended a ceremony at Ammunition Hill in Jerusalem. At 9 p.m., an evening of songs dedicated to the fallen will begin at the Knesset Plaza. Let's see. I'm not going to read everything they're doing about their Memorial Day. Here's something also in Arutz Sheva. It says, Netanyahu says, "Refrain from weeping. Thy work shall be rewarded." I know where that's from. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking on the eve of Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and terror victims, quotes the Bible to the effect that working to build Israel is the country's solace for those killed. He spoke at Jerusalem's Ammunition Hill, where a battle raged on the second day of the Six-Day War in 1967, which concluded with all of Jerusalem and the rest of Israel being united for the first time in 2,000 years. Let's see. Quoting from the book of Jeremiah, actually Jeremiah 31:16, the Prime Minister stated, "Our grief is overwhelming, our hearts ache, where will we find comfort?" The prophet said, "Refrain thy voice from weeping, and thine eyes from tears, for thy work shall be rewarded." We shall find solace in building the land and the people and striving for days of peace, and in our knowledge that their work shall be rewarded and their heroism shall be remunerated. What? Remembered. Prime Minister Netanyahu's family also is one of the bereaved in Israel. His brother Yonatan was killed while commanding the daring Operation Entebbe in 1976. And in fact, he went and mourned yesterday at the graveyard, or the cemetery where his brother's buried, so that people today could go in there without, his swarms of security people securing the area. So he went and mourned yesterday for his brother who died. Alright, let's look at some other things. Something out of Israel Today says Israelis on Monday conducted their annual transition from darkness to light, from mourning to celebration, as they marked the back-to-back national holidays of Remembrance Day and Independence Day. So tomorrow's their Independence Day. Even though they became a nation on May 14th, they celebrate it tomorrow. Let's see. Let's have a look at some other things here. Here's something out of Breitbart.com. Speaking of Israel, they are going to invest $1 billion in the Iron Dome missile system. Israel plans to invest $1 billion in the development and production of batteries for its Iron Dome rocket interception system, a top Israeli defense official said in an interview published today. Excuse me, still fighting this stuff. It's getting better, though. Defense Ministry Director General Major General Udi Shani told the daily Haaretz newspaper that 5 countries have already expressed interest in the system, which was successfully deployed during a rise in rocket fire from Gaza in early April. But in his first interview since his appointment in January 2010, he warned that the system's capacity must be put in perspective. He says, "We need to adjust expectations in relation to Iron Dome," he told Haaretz. "We have accomplished a significant achievement in reaching operational capacity sooner than expected, but this is not a system that can ensure the interception of every rocket in every situation. I'm sure in the very near future, when Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran rain 36 to 45,000 rockets their way, they're going to find out just what percentage of these rockets and missiles their system can intercept. Of course, they have 4 or 5 systems set up. You know, the Arrow, the Sling, the Iron Dome. They've got Patriot missiles. They've got several defense systems deployed, which will probably be put to the fullest test very soon, if my Bible is any kind of indicator. Okay, here's something out of Middle East Online. It says, a new mood in Cairo. Egypt and Israel are headed for crisis. You know, I find this very interesting because this whole thing kind of started in Egypt, back when Moses told Pharaoh, let my people go. And they finally did. They crossed the Red Sea. You know, God parted it for them. They crossed on dry land. It's going to end with Egypt being a big player in this whole scenario. The story says, even if Egypt continues the flow of gas, it is almost certain to insist on a sharp rise in the cost, following reports that Mubarak and other officials are being investigated on corruption charges relating to contracts that underpriced gas to Israel, notes Jonathan Cook. You know, there was a recent gas line explosion. The gas that goes from Egypt to Israel caused some problems. And now, this says Israeli officials have expressed alarm at a succession of moves by the interim Egyptian government that they fear signal an impending crisis in relations with Cairo. The widening rift was underscored yesterday when leaders of the rival Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah signed a reconciliation pact in the Egypt capital. Egypt's secret role in brokering the agreement last week caught both Israel and the United States by surprise. Of course, Netanyahu called the deal a tremendous blow to peace and a great victory for terrorism. Now, this says that Cairo hopes to renew ties with Iran and renegotiate a long-standing contract to supply Israel with natural gas. Let's see. Again, I'm not going to read this whole story. If I read every story in its entirety on all these stories I read, I'd have like a 2-hour video every day. And I refuse to do that. So, in order to try to keep it short, I'll skip through some of these stories, but find it very interesting that the Egyptians want to annul the 1979 peace treaty with Israel. Okay? And, you know, another unnamed official told the Jerusalem Post that the upgrading of the relationship between Egypt and Hamas might allow the Islamic movement to develop into a formidable terrorist military machine. You know, it's getting very interesting excuse me, to see all the players lining up and all the pieces falling into place for end time prophecies that you can read about. For instance, Isaiah 17:1, Ezekiel 38 and 39, several others coming into play here. Excuse me. Still trying to kick this thing. Alright, let's talk about, here's a story that talks about the end time alerts, seeing God use today's events to fulfill his kingdom plan. And this is a blogger that says how God is using death in the Middle East to bring life to end times fulfillment. Talks about a significant death theme resurfacing in the Middle East. First there was the beginning of the deaths of the Middle East regimes. There was Tunisia, then there was Egypt. Both of these regimes died, but we're not quite sure what's going to replace them yet. Who knows what's going to happen in Egypt? Again, Isaiah, I believe that's 19, prophesies something in Egypt. And again, we can add the Bashar Assad regime of Syria to the list of departed probably here pretty soon. The persistence of the Syrian dissidents, the infighting of Assad clans, and the targeted sanctions against the Assad regime are all key signals that the Assad regime is on the way out. Whew. And another powerful indicator that Assad will go down is the Bible's prediction of peace and security in connection with a treaty with Israel. Since Assad would never accept a peace treaty with Israel, it appears he needs to be removed from power for the Bible's prediction to actually come true. So, again, we're seeing so many players come into play right now. In fact, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and spiritual leader Ayatollah Khomeini they're having disagreements, and this is causing a rift in their government. Of course, we can't forget about the death of Osama bin Laden, the psychological leader of Middle East terrorism. Representations have an especially important role in the Middle Eastern mindset, which is why, for example, Islamic fundamentalists cannot stand for Israel to exist there. This is because, since all of the Middle East was conquered by Arabs in the name of Allah, each day that Jews maintain a state in the Middle East, it's a reminder to them of a defeat not just of their armies, but of Allah himself, who is a false god. So in the mindset of Islamic terrorists, Osama bin Laden stood for Allah's victory over the great Satan, the United States. He became the leader who emboldened terrorism against Israel and the West, as well as against democracy. So the death of bin Laden then was a major psychological blow to terrorists. In addition, it has emboldened dissidents in the Middle East, particularly those in Syria and Iran. While we're on this death theme, let me just, the surface death of the U.S.-led Palestinian-Israeli peace process. For example, on Thursday last week, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stated that the U.S. cannot support any government that consists of Hamas. Actually, she added the conjunctive phrase, unless Hamas adopts the Quartet's principles, which refers to recognizing Israel's right to exist, renouncing violence, and respecting Israel's previous treaties signed by the Palestinians. However, she may have well has said something like, unless circles become squares, or, light becomes darkness, because basically, in other words, she's saying that the U.S. is done with the Palestinian-Israeli peace process because they won't continue with a terrorist group, which Hamas is. Of course, it took the U.S. a long time to finally admit this. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't think Obama can do anything between now and September. It's going to be up to Israel to do something themselves. And you know what? Let me just say they need to lean not on their own understanding, but they need to lean on God. They need to trust Him and trust God's plan for them. Just my thoughts. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry to be coughing while doing a video. In other news, here's something out of Yahoo. Iran is doing a final pre-start test at their nuclear plant. They're conducting final tests at its first nuclear power plant and is expected to start generating electricity in the next 2 months, Iranian media said today. So, for the country that supposedly has the fourth most generous supply of oil, they insist they need nuclear technology to supply them with electricity. Okay. Alright, we'll see how that all works out. How about this? Something out of Forbes.com says the glorious end of usernames and passwords. Plainly said, your iris will unlock the world. Okay, this story talks about the first lock and key and digital login passwords before they were created. Logical security and physical security have always been two separate concepts. But technologists have searched for decades attempting to find a converged solution and narrow the gap between protecting one's identity and controlling access to physical and virtual interactions. Throughout this search, they call this the holy grail of security and identity, is to find an appropriate biometric key to fuse physical and logical worlds. Biometric solutions have been an important key to protecting identity, unlocking access control, and ensuring transactional integrity. But until now, there's not been a scalable, cost-effective, easy-to-use biometric solution available. However, iris-based biometrics, your eye, have been a technology generally relegated to movie screen fiction and not-so-distant future. Today, that is no longer the case. The technology is here. As you read this, or as you're hearing me say this, iris-based technology is rolling out to the institutional, governmental, and consumer markets. Within a year, millions of Americans and Europeans will gain access to their offices, their homes, and their computers just by looking at a small device that will capture the 2,048 unique points of information in each of their irises while in motion and at a distance. You know, my computer has facial recognition. I stick my face up here and it recognizes my face. It lets me in. Pretty interesting. But, you know, if you ever saw that movie, what was that movie Tom Cruise did? Minority Report? Where you get on the subway and it scans your irises. You walk into a building, it scans. It knows who's there. You walk into a store, it says, "Oh, hello, Daryl. You know, glad to see you back again. We have these jeans on sale. They're your size," whatever. This will be happening in real life very soon. So get ready for that. It's coming. And it's not just something the movies talk about. It's real. You know, if they had this type of security in place, none of the terrorists on 9/11 would have ever been able to board those planes. And they figure the amount that they're losing in financial fraud each year will make up the difference of the cost this is going to be upon all of us, basically. So, get ready for this, because it will be coming. Alright, let me go to Proverbs 21, verse 21. This is out of the NIV. It says, "Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor." Let's talk about the husband of Mary for a moment, Joseph. You know, Joseph was an ordinary man. He was a carpenter. But we actually know very little about Jesus' stepfather. But we do know that Joseph was an honest, upright man who was engaged to Mary, the mother of Jesus. In fact, if you read in the beginning verses of Matthew 1, it talks about a record of the genealogy of Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And it goes through each and every step. And it names names and says, well, he was the father of, you know, and it gets down to about verse 16, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. You can trace their lineage from Abraham to David to Jesus. Okay? But we do know that Joseph was an honest man. He was an upright man who was engaged to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now think about this. Jewish marriages were arranged in those days, and an engagement was as legally binding as marriage. So in the eyes of the law, Joseph and Mary were bound together, though they had not yet taken that final step. Mary first learned of her new reality from an angel who visited her, explaining that she was chosen to give birth to the Messiah. Now, can you imagine how that would make you feel? But Mary loved God, so she humbly and immediately accepted His perfect will for her life. Now fast forward to Mary's return home after visiting her cousin Elizabeth for several months. Now Joseph's world was about to be rocked by a pregnant fiancée and an incredible truth. By now her condition was obvious to anyone who saw her. She was no longer the newly pregnant girl with a secret that would change history. She needed to tell Joseph. And since they were not yet married, and Joseph was a man of integrity, this could not be his child. Now Mary knew the danger she was facing. At worst, Joseph could have her stoned for adultery. Now at best, he could divorce her, leaving her pregnant and alone. Yet Mary did what she had to. She told Joseph the truth, and she trusted God. Now imagine poor Joseph. I mean, how would you feel if someone came to you, your girlfriend, she was obviously pregnant, and you had not yet had relations with her, and she tells you, oh, an angel appeared to me and I'm going to have the Messiah of the world, the Son of God. How many of you guys would be like, yeah, right, you're crazy, lady, I'm out of here, right? I mean, really, you know, you'd be like, couldn't you come up with a better lie than that? I mean, that's a good one, I gotta admit, very creative, very unique, but come on, really? I mean, did he wonder if this was some kind of crazy lie, or she lost her mind, or thinking she's pregnant with the Messiah the Jews had been waiting on for centuries? But being a kind man, Joseph decided to quietly divorce her and not bring shame to her family. But Matthew 1:20 tells us that the angel of the Lord spoke to him in a dream, confirming what Mary had said, and told Joseph to marry her. So Joseph accepted the truth and did as he was told. Now, his integrity was blameless before God. I know I would have had a hard time with it. An angel would have had to appear to me too, because I would have done what my mind would have come up with to do, thinking I was doing the right thing, when in fact it wasn't. But have you ever faced a tough decision where any of several choices would have been acceptable, but your integrity caused you to choose God's way? Well, congratulations if so, because you have stood blameless before the Lord in that decision. Now, I just hope and pray that whenever God calls us to do something, that we will listen and that we will hear, and that with integrity we will follow what He wants for our lives. God bless you guys. Good Lord willing, I'll see you again tomorrow.